This is Greg Canty here, and welcome to the Win Happy podcast. Stay tuned for interesting chats with interesting people about winning their lives and being happy at the same time. This show has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I chatted with Shelly Rourke, the owner of Shelly's, an online baked goods gift business. Shelly is one of the early stage entrepreneurs participating in the UCC Ignite Accelerator program. And as one of the marketing sessions was wrapping up, the group started chatting about the horrific October 7th attacks by Hamas in Israel. Shelly announced to the group that she had been to an international summer camp in the West Bank in August and opened up about what she experienced. On the podcast, she chats about her life and career, discovering at 21 that she had two siblings she never knew about, why this architect started a baked goods business, and how exactly she ended up at the Laje Centre in Ida, a refugee camp 2 kilometres north of Bethlehem in the West Bank. As you might expect, this was a big conversation. Let's hear from Shelly. Shelly Rourke, a huge welcome to the Win Happy podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
Good. And when I met you and we started to have a conversation, I decided immediately, okay, I'm grabbing this one for the podcast because your story is too interesting.
Yeah. Well, you just had mentioned something at the end of Ignite, and it just, I suppose, sparked a conversation to tell you about the recent trip that I had been on to Palestine in August, this past August. So I think you and everybody else was instantly listening to what I had to say. Yeah, so I went to visit at the beginning of August, and that was obviously my first trip there, but it definitely left a lasting impression. And I had the opportunity to go to Ida refugee camp, which is in Bethlehem. And there's a community centre there called Laje, and it runs an international summer camp. And it's, yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to pause you there.
Yeah.
Because I'd like the listener to get to know you. Who the hell are you? And what brought you to this place and this scenario whereby you'd entertain doing something like that on your holidays and your interests and everything else? So the question I ask everyone on the podcast is, who the hell are you and where did you come from?
Okay, so I'm Shelly Rourke and I'm from Galway, a little village with about 200 people called Woodford, and it's in the Slievachty Mountains in County Galway, southeast. And I came to college in Cork in 2008 to study architecture, and I've kind of been on and off, back and forth, but I recently came back again to live in Cork after stints in different parts of both Ireland and the world.
Cool. And tell me, what did your mum and dad do?
So my dad is a plasterer, so he worked in the construction industry, probably inspired my love for kind of sites. We would have went to a lot of sites, kind of, we'd be looking, pricing jobs on Sundays and stuff. And my mum looked after us all at home.
Were you a big family?
So there's 5 children. So I have 3 brothers and sisters. This is actually kind of a complex story as well, because in my house growing up, there was always 5. And then when I was in second year of college, I learned that I had an extra brother and sister. So my mum had to give them up for adoption in the 70s. So there's actually 7 of us all together. Okay.
And did you get to know your new brother and sister over time?
Yeah. So they actually only live like an hour away. Yeah, so yeah, we know them quite well now.
Cool. That's amazing. And tell me, are they both with the same parents?
Yeah, so they were adopted together in the 70s. and one of them is married and has children. So they were actually the first nieces and nephews that I would have had.
The story gets more and more interesting, Shelly. So your dad just dragged you out on little Sunday spins, and what he was doing instead was going to a building site and checking it. And of course, you were happy to tag along, or maybe you were just dragged along. I'm not sure.
I'd say I was probably dragged along, and then probably that sparked an interest, and would have always just had an interest in watching, I don't know, those TV programs of doing up houses. And yeah, so just always would have had an interest. And then I suppose when I went to study architecture, then, got an appreciation for design, and yeah, would be very interested in it.
Your new brother and sister, what age were you when you discovered there were two more in the family?
So I was in second year of college. So I think I was like 21. Yeah.
So how was that news broken to you?
At the kitchen table when I went home from college in UCC. So I'd say I actually, we were kind of individually told, and I was the last to be told because I'm the youngest. So yeah, I kind of remember being at home for the weekend on a Friday evening after getting the bus from Cork, and the sister next to me, Carmel, she'd been in the kitchen before, and then it was my turn to come in. So I just was told there was like the table was full of these letters and pictures, and the story unfolded.
Wow, that's amazing. And from then to actually meeting them, was that a big time gap?
I actually can't remember. It probably was, I think. Like, I remember it was Halloween that I was told, and I feel like maybe it was in the springtime that we met them. So me and my siblings, or my sisters actually, we went to my sister's house in Clare, Mona's, and she lives next door to our brother Donal. And yeah, we met her, and she only had 2 children at the time. So.
Okay, that was a fairly, I don't know, how was it for you?
I think in some ways, like obviously it's very overwhelming, but in that scenario, it was probably, I don't know, it seemed kind of normal in some ways because she's the only one that looks like my mum, and my brother looks, let's say, like our cousins on my mum's side, whereas we more look like our dad.
I'm sure it was very complicated as well for your new brothers and sisters' parents.
Yeah, so actually their dad had passed away, so it was just their mum B that we had the privilege of meeting. So it was nice to meet her, and I think that meant a lot for my mum as well.
I had another lady on the podcast a good while back, and she had to give her child up for adoption. Mm-hmm. And she's praying, and to this day I think she still is, that she'll have the opportunity someday of meeting. And I don't know fully how it works, but I think maybe the kid doesn't want to meet her or something. I'm not fully sure, but she's praying for the day that she can actually meet him. And of course that was Ireland at the time, wasn't it, where we had our own little way of sorting out these hidden secrets that we had in Catholic Ireland and everything else. Okay, so the young Shelly, off on the building sites, and it was obviously an entrepreneurial family. So your dad, I'm sure you listened to a million phone calls of him.
Phone calls, yeah.
Negotiating and booking jobs and talking about problems he was having. Did you have a sense that it was an entrepreneurial house?
I suppose, yeah, like as in I remember like my mom doing the wages, every Thursday night for the lads that he had working for them. And it was definitely a very creative household that I grew up in. There was always something being made, whether it was on the sewing machine or like baking, or my dad would be at stuff out in the shed. So it was definitely about making stuff. So that was...
And tell me, the ebbs and flows, the peaks and the troughs of running your own business. So would you have had a sense that, this has been a good year, or things are a little bit tight now, we mightn't be going on that nice summer holiday? Would you have had a sense of, the ups and downs of having your own business?
Yeah, I suppose he got He had a brain tumor kind of when I was in sixth class in school. So I suppose, like, definitely would have known that the pressure of being self employed, when you had, I don't know how many lads he had working for him, maybe 15 or 20. Do you know that that was definitely you could tell that was very stressful time. And then kind of after that, he would have kind of gently rolled it down, just because I suppose he'd seen a bit of perspective, possibly maybe that it wasn't all about working.
Yeah, it is a big responsibility, and
Yeah.
we employ a good few people and everything else, and at times, you worry, and as time goes on, that worry becomes the norm. That there's always some problem in the workplace, that you need to deal with, and there's always some problem that needs to be solved. And I do think, a bit like what you were saying about your dad, I do think from time to time, in particular the dark days, where it can take a ferocious toll on you. I know the recession of the, 2009, 10, 11. When you're under pressure, you're responsible for a team. Not only are you responsible for your own income, but you feel like you're responsible for their livelihoods as well. It's difficult, and it can really wear on you. And it's funny, like we're having this conversation beginning of November, when we're all after making our accounts, our returns. And when the accountant tells you, by the way, there's a surcharge of 3% of your income because you're self-employed, and you're like, sorry? Yeah, self-employed people paid 3% extra, and you're like, why? I thought the government were making adjustments and all this kind of thing. It's a bit of a chore, and I think for anyone, and thinking about your dad and every other self-employed person, there's a lot of stress and strain to all of that maybe a lot of people who aren't self-employed don't even realize. And I know everyone has their own challenges. But yourself and that career path and your thoughts, as a young woman growing up and everything, were you nudging 100% towards something very, very practical, or were you trying to figure out what to do?
I suppose I'm probably still figuring that out. So yeah, I suppose I had architecture down, and I knew that it was going to be an intense enough course, so I actually took a gap year in between my leaving cert and starting it. So I just did a PLC course in Galway, and it was in interior design, and then started into architecture, which is very practical actually, making models, drawing, a lot of hours in the studio. And yeah, that's what was the enjoyable part. Like, we were mainly physically producing stuff rather than, kind of being over a computer, like, or over a book. Like, we had very little exams, and, it was kind of a nice environment.
Yeah. Will you talk me through your little career path? Because I know there was an early stint in New York as well.
Yeah, so finished architecture, and me and a group of friends, we ventured off to New York and worked there for a year in two different practices. Actually, one practice, both kind of commercial. One kind of specialised in office fit outs, and the other one then was high end apartments. So it was a nice insight into how the people of Manhattan and Brooklyn lived. And it was a great experience. Like, to be honest, came back to Cork afterwards and I was really deflated because I was like, the buzz of New York, I was like, oh, nowhere is ever going to live up to it. And even when I lived in Dublin for a little time as well, I was like, this isn't, there's just not the same life and energy. So it was great.
Going from Park Avenue and Madison Avenue, I think they were the two addresses that I saw to working in the architect's practice in Cork City or in Dublin.
Yeah. So it's definitely like, it was the same kind of concepts and stuff in both places. And actually the architectural practices in New York definitely looked towards European architecture for inspiration. So I thought that was kind of funny at the time when I was there.
And of course, Madison Avenue is where Mad Men and all that kind of thing came from, wasn't it? That kind of fuzzy part. At that time, was it still a centre for ad agencies and all that kind of thing? Was it that kind of thing still in the location? Or would you have
I
been aware of
suppose,
it?
you don't even know, because I remember even we were on the 14th floor or whatever, so you're just zipping up through the building every day and you have no idea really what's on the other floors. You're kind of in your own little isolated floor plate. But yeah, it was great. Like, you'd be going after work to like Central Park or Bryant Park, and it was just normal, and it just became a backdrop really. But yeah, no, it was a great experience.
Yeah. Did you think about staying there?
I don't like, I think maybe looking back, I probably should have stayed for another couple of years, just because we'd done, let's say, me and the group of friends that I went with, we'd put in all the ground, real heavy work of getting the apartment, getting all the furniture and stuff, and then just kind of walked away. But I'm still glad that I left, because I never saw myself staying there long term. I just certain things about living there was hard as well. It was a great experience, but I didn't see myself being there long term.
What were the things you didn't like about the place?
Um, sometimes the I don't know. I suppose Americans, even though we speak the same language, I think culturally we're quite different.
It's kind of hardcore capitalism, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think actually maybe that was my problem as well. I felt as well, like, while I was there, my only trips were going to be going home, and I had other things that I wanted to see. I just didn't want to be going back to Galway and just seeing Galway and New York. So I don't know, that was kind of my thought process too. And I still had 1 year left in architecture to finish, and I kind of have that mindset anyway of finishing things out. So I wanted to get back and get it done.
Yeah, and in the States as well, in particular, when you begin a job, there's tiny, tiny amount of holidays. And as you
Oh,
say,
that was a big problem. Well, I
yeah,
forgot.
and if all of your holidays were going to be used up just visiting
Yeah.
home, God Almighty, you're going to have no life other than work and
Yeah.
seeing the family,
Yeah. Yeah. So that definitely, I forgot that. Yeah. The 12 days or whatever with the 4 sick days. So yeah, that was another determining factor.
Yeah, it's a bit bizarre.
Yeah.
So returning to Ireland, then back to architecture. So how did that life suit you?
Yeah, it was grand. I really enjoyed the last year actually in the masters, because you kind of specialize the way that the course is run. You do like you spend the year focusing on one city. So the city that we focused on was Athens. And that was just kind of an interesting time that, because there was a lot of refugees migrating from Syria, making their way through Greece and moving up to Northern Europe. So it was an interesting kind of city to be kind of observing from a kind of social and cultural perspective.
Okay, and
Yeah.
so have you practiced as an architect since then? Because I know you've been lecturing as well.
Yeah, so I did a stint in UCC as well, but then, yeah, I kind of wanted to get my professional exams done. So I worked with practice in Dublin, and that was commercial buildings and educational, and it was good practice to get the exams completed and to work, to get experience working in architecture.
Yeah. Okay. And there was an itch then that took you on a different direction. Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, so I suppose I always had an interest in baking, and would have always been doing it at home. And I started it in 2020. I just started my business, which is Shelly's, and it organically began because a friend of mine, her mum, passed away, and it was the height of COVID, and I really wanted to send her a thoughtful gift, but I couldn't find anything, and I just baked up an assortment of goodies that I knew that she'd like, and I got them delivered to her house, because I wanted her and her sisters to enjoy it, following the days of the funeral, that she could reminisce about her mom with her sisters. So that's kind of how it began. And then other friends and family then began to order boxes for friends for weddings that they couldn't attend. And even my own cousin, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he had ordered all these boxes from me, you know, to thank people that had helped him while he was ill. And then that was literally in the Christmas, and in the February, then he passed away. So it kind of has a bit of a morbid kind of beginning, but there's been loads of joyful occasions as well that I've sent boxes for people for.
Okay, so in a nutshell, you're up and running in business. What's the web address?
Shellys.ie. So I kept it simple. I just called it after myself. And yeah, so the website is up and running, and I send out gift boxes of baked goods. So whether like it's a collection, so it's brownies, shortbread, caramel slices, cookies, lemon drizzle, and carrot cake. So people order it online for their friends and family, and then it gets delivered typically next day, and the recipient receives it then. So I suppose it's kind of like an unexpected parcel of sugar and joy that they don't expect to get among their ESP bills. And so people, people really enjoy it because I think it's unexpected, and they can just unbox it and enjoy it over a cup of tea and ring their friend probably that's sent it to them.
And the cruelty of all this is that I met Shelly on the UCC Ignite program, which is a program for young entrepreneurs to take the business to the next level and accelerate, or whatever language we want to use. And we're in there with a group, and of course Shelly is describing her business, and maybe it's in the afternoon or maybe it's in the morning. We had sessions at different times. And Shelly is talking about all of these gorgeous baked goodies. And you're not allowed to do that, Shelly, unless you have them there to sample. It's just torture. So, I'll never ever forgive this Galway girl for inflicting this pain on me and the other members of the group. While we're chatting about it, can you just talk about the Ignite program for a few minutes? Because I'm sure listeners are wondering, what in the name of God is that all about?
Yeah. So, I just started in October, so I'm only 4 weeks into it, but it's a really supportive environment, and we're exposed to all these different successful business people who come in and give us their time to tell us what they've learned and how they have grown their successful business. So it's just kind of interesting, I suppose, to be in an environment with other young entrepreneurs who, even though their business might be very different to yours, you are kind of all going through the same process. So then it's nice then to have the mentors that come in, and you can see the path that they've gone from starting it to becoming a successful, sustainable business.
Yeah, and that's open to graduates, isn't it? With business idea, or maybe they're in the early stages of a business and they need that kind of A to Z of different business supports to really accelerate them. Those programs run in a cycle. So if anyone listening is interested, that's you'll find that on the UCC Ignite website.
Yeah.
So we were in the middle of one of these conversations, and it's I don't know the date, but it pretty much came very, very soon after October the 7th. We were just chatting, wrapping up the session, and you sprung it upon us that you had been on a trip. So back to the beginning of the podcast, you might take up the story. So your interest in that whole area, and obviously that's 2 weeks of your holidays, getting a volunteer experience.
Yeah.
So your interest in that whole area and how this even came in front of you, you might talk me through that.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, kind of got this opportunity to go to this community centre in a refugee camp called Ida in Bethlehem. And it all came about really because I suppose always had an interest in the area, and a friend of mine had been there the previous summer and had gone to different cities in the West Bank. And I remember when he came back, he said, "Shelly, if you ever have time, you should definitely go and do their international summer camp." So I kind of had it in the back of my mind, and the application came, and I popped it in because even though it has volunteering in the title, it isn't really about volunteering. So their objective in the centre is for the people that come to educate them about life in Palestine and life under military occupation, so that you understand their story from their perspective. And then the hope is that you would go back and that you would tell people about how difficult life is there.
Like me and the listeners and the other people
Yes.
on the Ignite program.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And when you say they, who are the they that are organizing these summer camps?
So they are refugees that live in Ida camp. So they're same age as me, kind of in their 30s. And this community centre is everything. Like it's their gym, it's their their equivalent of their men's shed or their women's shed. It's a hub for meeting people. It's their environmental health unit, because they don't have they don't really have doctors. They're dependent on the UN. So a lot of people that live in the camp, have developed hypertension and diabetes because their diet has changed considerably, because they would have been a very agricultural population, and now they're dependent on all this processed food. So this community centre is everything. And
it's called Lage, is it?
Lage, yeah.
And there's a meaning behind the word Lage, isn't there?
Yeah, refugee in Arabic. Yeah. Yeah, so it's only 0.5 of a kilometre, and there's over 2,000 people that live there. So really densely populated. And like if you're walking down the street, you wouldn't even have to have your hands stretched out that you would touch both buildings. So typically, it would have been a refugee camp when the Palestinians were displaced in 1948. So they were pushed out of what is now Israel, or what they would refer to as 48, because they won't even give it the title of Israel. They were pushed into the West Bank, into different refugee camps. So you would have numerous villages. And I think Ida is made up of 27 different villages. So then they were pushed in. And originally they would have lived in tents. And then they were given like a 7 square metre plot of land to build. So basically you would kind of have the grandparents on the ground floor, and then they would have precariously built floor plates on top of that. And I suppose as I was walking around, I was like, how structurally stable is this really? Life is very difficult there, because, even if you're having a fight, everyone knows. There's no privacy. Children are playing on the street, and there's like tiny little cars zipping up and down, weaving in and out. And the camp is literally right beside the wall. So there's a wall that divides the West Bank and Israel, and it's 4 meters tall, and it's literally precast concrete panels that literally like snake around the border. And every so often then you have these military towers, and the tower closest to Ida, to the actual camp, the children had stacked up tires, and they filled it with kind of like, they basically burnt the tires, and kind of that whole military tower, that lookout tower, is all blackened from the bottom. So they actually managed to get the soldiers out of that lookout, and now they're maybe like 150 meters further away. So they would have been very oppressive when they're right there. Now they're still there, but they're a little bit further away. So you don't have to go too far to know that you're being kind of held in a pin.
So the beginning of your process to go in there, you obviously filled out an application form or something.
Yeah.
How long are these summer camps running, do you know?
I think since 2000, maybe. Yeah.
Did other people go out from Ireland besides yourself?
I didn't know anybody that was going, so I applied, and the communication was very kind of loose. Didn't hear much. I was like, geez, where am I really going? I wasn't given too much information. Had missed kind of opportunities to do a call because the time didn't either suit me or the lady Mej who lives there. And anyway, eventually I was like, right, booked the tickets, told her I booked the tickets, and we got an email, I think, on the Friday, and we were starting on the Tuesday, and I'd actually already left Ireland. And, it was like the what to pack, what to do, because they wanted to give advice, about to delete basically all correspondence that I was going to Laje. So there was 10 people in the group. 5 of them happened to be Irish, and then the remainder were Palestinian descendants. So either their parents or their grandparents were Palestinian. Some had never been to Palestine, even though actually one girl, she'd never been to Palestine, but her parents were Palestinian. Yeah, that was kind of the mix.
Where did you fly into?
So flew from Amsterdam to Tel Aviv, and that was an adventure in itself because I went with the national Israeli airline called El Al. And in Amsterdam, I just had to check on luggage, and I had kind of weaved myself, just to be like, typically you would just arrive at the gate to board the plane. And I saw that everyone else had these blue tags on their bag. So I was a little bit like, oh, I don't have one of those. And I was kind of worried about the weight of my bag, but that was really the least of my problems because, like, I went up to the desk and basically you're kind of pulled aside for questioning before you get on the plane. And they ask you like a series of questions of what do you do and where are you working? Do you know any people from the following countries? And they would list out all the Arab countries. Where are you going? Who are you staying with? What's your intention when you're there? And it was literally like rapid fire questions. They didn't make any sense, like it wasn't like there wasn't a logic to it. And it was literally just to throw you off. So to be honest, I was a little bit unprepared at that stage because I thought that would come in Tel Aviv, but it's kind of similar to US clearance. So there's Israeli intelligence in Amsterdam airport. And actually, because one guy flew directly from Dublin too, and they're in Dublin airport too. And then they, like as in nothing is a big rush. And you're like, oh my God, am I going to make my flight? And then they're like, oh, you need to go back there. Not very clear in the directions. And they're like, you need to go downstairs and then just open this door. So I went and like, there was no sign. You just open the door and it's like a dark room and you're like, oh, okay. And then there's these people, like these men in suits, like all black suits. And they just like take your phone, your bag, everything. And they just leave you sitting on the chair. So I didn't have a watch on me. So I had no idea of the time. And I was like, oh, I felt like if I asked, there was only maybe a half an hour. I felt like if I asked, they would just be slower. So I could see them then. They took everything out of my bag, like literally lifting it up. And like, where the handles go in at the back, like they literally were just shaking that, like they'd everything taken out and they had to put everything back in. And they gave you back your phone and all that. And yeah, anyway, I did make it, but it wasn't exactly the most pleasant experience.
But did you tell them where you were going, what your destination was or your reason for traveling?
Oh, sorry, absolutely not. No. So I had my sister's friend had moved with her husband. He works at Boston Scientific in Galway, and he'd gotten like an opportunity to go out to Tel Aviv because they'd bought this company. And so thankfully I had their address. So I was like, oh, I'm staying in Herzliya. And they were like, oh, 3 weeks, that's a long time. And I was like, yeah, I'm going for 3 weeks. But I know that loads of other people, would have booked hotels and hostels in Tel Aviv, just to have a record.
So you have to tell them porkies to get out there. You were instructed to.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what was the story then in Tel Aviv, and who met you, and how did the rest of your trip
so then
go?
it's kind of funny then in Tel Aviv. Like I remember the plane landed, and like typically on a plane, people get off in order that they got on because it makes the most logical sense. But literally there, it was everyone for themselves. People were pushing and shoving. There was no logic. There was no queue. So I wasn't in any rush because this lady Pauline was coming to pick me up, thankfully. It was nice to see a friendly face. And eventually got off the plane and she had told me that you would have to get like this little blue ticket, like a piece of paper to put in your passport, because obviously they know that people don't want a stamp in their passport. So you had to mind that piece of paper. But even the logic to get the piece of paper, nobody was queuing. It was literally like everyone for themselves. no logic to it. And then literally just walked out. Like I'm not really sure, but I had a sticker on my passport that maybe they knew already that I'd been through the questioning and passed or whatever. So then went out into the arrivals hall, and I have to say, it was really good to see a friendly face, because I remember in Amsterdam thinking like, oh my God, because basically the girl beside me, I turned to her to just ask her, I said, oh, how did you get the blue tag? And she was from Ukraine, and she said, she was going to the Seychelles, and she was just using Tel Aviv as her stopover. And she said, I'm never going through Tel Aviv again. She'd basically been pulled aside for 2 hours in a room, questioned, and like, they're liable to do anything. Like, I learned that afterwards, actually. They could even strip search you. Yeah, there is no limit to it. And they could easily refuse you entry.
Happy holiday.
Yeah. And then they have, like, it's kind of very contradictory, because you go into the airport and it's all like, welcome to Tel Aviv, and like real, like they're as literally Pauline's Porrick said, because he'd been there multiple times, and he said they even asked him how he met his wife, and he literally was like, if you want people to come visit your country, you need to stop asking these irrelevant questions, because it just, I suppose their whole thing is they want to make it so difficult for people to get there. It's not an easy place well, that was my experience, but I don't know if that was also because I was flying with the national airline, because literally that night when I stayed with Pauline and Porrick was like, oh, I should have told you not to fly with them.
So what was your next step?
Next step then was getting the train. So I stayed with them for a few days at the beginning. And then the camp, that was the Sunday, and then the camp started on the Tuesday. So Pauline dropped me to the train station in Herzliya, and really, like, Israel isn't that big, it's not very big at all. So like the journey to Jerusalem was only an hour on the train, high-speed train. And I remember she dropped me at the train station, and all we could see was loads of soldiers, like young people in their 18, 19, 20. They had their handbag in one hand and they had their rifle on the other, nails done, makeup done. And we all walked into the train station, and immediately, like, on entry, you had to, remove all your bags, put them through the security, got on the train, and it was, again, just full of people, military soldiers, and they're all on their phones with just the gun hanging off the side. So get to Jerusalem, and then basically we're told we're meeting at Damascus Gate. So went to Damascus Gate, and, Jerusalem, from what I saw, was, super, you get the feeling that it's very tense, but it's also very slick. Like, there's a tram, like the train station that I arrived into, is like, I don't know how many escalators I went up, but, it felt like it was as deep as the tube. And everything was super glossy, and there was loads of cranes, loads of construction going on. And then I got the tram over to Damascus Gate, and that's like East Jerusalem. So it's mainly would be Palestinians, communities that would be living there rather than Jewish Israelis, and broken footpaths, hostels and hotels that you wouldn't even consider, like live animals. It was like total contrast to what the kind of slick modern city I'd been in, like literally 4 stops away. And we were meeting at this hostel, and I remember I went up, because I don't know what I had in my head. I thought we'd be meeting in like this lobby, but literally like, well, anyway, it was like a stairwell basically. So I just kind of stood there, and thankfully your man let me use the Wi-Fi. So I knew that someone was coming out basically from the West Bank to get us, because she's American, Amal. So I just waited there, and then I saw what looked like other Irish people, and I was like, oh, they must be coming to Laje as well. And anyway, that was where it began. We went across the street then for the bus to get into the West Bank, and there's no departure time. Like, as in, it's literally like when as many people come, the bus will go. So the bus left, and Yeah, so basically, this lady Amal, who's American, like, she was the only one that could come out to get us, because the rest of them that live in the West Bank that are Palestinian, they have a West Bank ID, which means unless they have a permit, they can't come to Jerusalem. So Jerusalem and Bethlehem are only 7 kilometers. That's all that separates them. And the third most holiest site for Muslims is the mosque, the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. So let's say, that's super important for them, but they can't even go there. So we went anyway, and we went to the camp, and we got a tour of Ida then that evening. And yeah, I don't know. I suppose I didn't know. I suppose you have an idea in your head, but it's kind of only when you're there and you see how life is very difficult, and there's sounds constantly in the background. There's people, people are always beeping because there's no logic to the traffic or anything, and people are, I suppose, their lives, they're subjected to waiting, whether it's waiting in traffic, or they're waiting for people to come out of prison, or they're waiting for their freedom from the occupation. It's all like, time is, I don't know, it's just, they have no control, they've no freedom of movement. They're just, in the West Bank, like, it's just checkpoint after checkpoint. So if they want to move between, let's say we went on a few trips, like, they would have brought us to different cities in the West Bank because they wanted us to see how the occupation was different in different cities. So we went to Jenin, we went to Hebron, and we went to Nablus. And, I remember the trip to Jenin, we did that so if we went on the Tuesday, we did that on the Thursday. And like, I remember before I left thinking, oh my God, because something had happened in Jenin. So basically the Israeli military had invaded Jenin refugee camp in July. So I was going the start of August. And like, I remember it was on RT News, like, one morning when I got up. And I, like, for ages, I hadn't told my parents that I was going. And I remember, like, the week that I was going to tell them, that was on the news. And I was like, oh, sugar, I'll just wait another week to tell them. And I even remember saying it to my friend, like, I was like, oh, we definitely won't be going anywhere near Jenin. I was like, that's in the north. I was like, that's like someone coming to Ireland in the 70s and, coming to Cork, and you're not going to Belfast. Like, I was like, won't be going. But when I saw the schedule, I was like, oh my God, we're going there. And like, literally in 2 days' time, even, the distance from Cork to Belfast, it isn't even that. Like, Jenin it's not that far away, but I remember, like, we were ages there because nothing is direct there. They make you go the longer way because you're kind of circumnavigating around Jerusalem because Jerusalem's cut off. So it makes your journey to other cities in the West Bank really long. And then I remember being on the bus, and like, you had all these Palestinians who'd never seen or been to the Dome of the Rock, the mosque, but we could see it in the hill in the distance. You could see the gold glimmer. And, they're just, I don't know. I don't think you can really imagine, not being able to go somewhere when we have such freedom of movement.
And that freedom of movement, Shelley, is that literally, arriving at a checkpoint and showing all your documentation again? And who's actually checking you at that point?
So the military soldiers. So for example, now, so let's say you might be passing, they could decide to stop you or they mightn't. So on the way there, we had to go through them, but they didn't. We were lucky that we didn't have to stop. But on the way back, it controls the traffic and everything. So they can instantly decide, oh, I'm going to shut that down. And then you're stuck there for 3 hours or 4 hours and they might just do it for the fun of it. There might be no logic to it. Or at the moment in the West Bank, they can't move between cities because they want to lock people down. So, you can never plan anything because your journey could take 30 minutes or it could take 4 hours. Yeah, so like as you're driving through the checkpoints, when they're not stopping you, they're like these little concrete huts, and there's sandbags on the thing, and they're literally leaning on it, and they're ready, aiming to fire, and they have their hand on the trigger. So like as buses pass and you can see it, and it's like if anyone steps out of line or does something, they're going to fire. Yeah. And then in some ways it's kind of crazy too, because they have them like at all the entrances to these Palestinian cities. And, you're kind of like, well, this is only like an 18, 19, 20, 21 year old. And you've left them kind of these bunch, there might be two or three of them together, but you've left them on their own. And it seems a little crazy as well. So on the bus, there was the people that were doing the international summer camp, and then we had the people from Ida. And one of the guys that was with us, Samir, he'd spent 19 years in jail. So he was coming with us on the trip. And he was sitting in the front, and it was like a little small minibus. But like any time that we were passing through the checkpoint, he'd always go to the back of the bus just because he just didn't want any hassle.
And tell me, from your point of view, the history of the place, understanding the deep issues between all the different factions and everything else. Were you all clued up, or were you semi-informed and going there with a bunch of questions in your head that you wanted answering?
I suppose I knew, I suppose, looking back, I knew very little. I knew, you knew the general gist of the history, but I suppose the primary objective of Lage is to educate, and they definitely achieved that. It was basically like, because people were like, oh, what kind of volunteering did you do? And I was like, it's really just sitting and listening to people's stories. So we met loads of different people who, were kind enough to share like pretty awful stories. So we had a mum who had like a teenage child who just finished the equivalent of his leaving cert, and he'd gone out to get an ice cream and basically was murdered. And they take bodies away basically, and they don't give them back to the family. So it's kind of like a punishment. So, for example, if somebody is involved in some sort of operation, and that person that has done the operation dies, the Israelis will take their body, and the body will serve the sentence, even though the person has passed. So she never knew where her son was. So they keep them kind of in the refrigerator, really. And I suppose she had done loads of court cases to try and get her son's body back. And she'd even contacted like a UK lawyer. And I don't know, the case was supposed to be in September. And she found out in the August that he'd been buried in an unmarked grave the previous May. And I just remember her telling us, like, I don't even know what I was doing that day that, like, my son was buried. And she'll never get to visit it because she just won't. And she can't even trust them, that the plot of land that they've told her is the actual grave. So she was one of the ladies that we met. Then Musa's the director of Lage, and he's a journalist, or sorry, like a photographer, and he told us his story. So he was standing on the balcony in Lage, and he was taking pictures of the soldiers coming into the camp. So the soldiers kind of come in once or twice a week, depending what's going on. And at the moment, I think they're coming in every day, and they just come in. And typically they'll come in. So when I was there, let's say they came in one night, and obviously I'm only aware of this afterwards. They come in the nighttime, maybe 20 of them, and they will arrest like a youth. And it's typically like they're targeting the young males who are at that defining part in their lives, and to arrest them. And it might be for a simple thing like throwing a stone, or it might be for nothing at all. There's loads of Palestinians that are in administrative detention, and that's basically like, they haven't committed a crime. They're just in there, and they're being held, and it's constantly being renewed. So like, first of all, it'll be 3 months, then they don't even know. They think at the end of the 3 months, oh, I'll get out. And then it's pushed to 6 months. Then it goes to 9 months, then it goes to 12. And it's just constantly. And there was a person that we heard about that was there for 13 years. So Musa, anyway, was taking pictures of the soldiers coming into the camp. This is in daylight. And they were like, stop taking pictures. And he's like, no, I'm just taking pictures. And they basically shot him. And they shot him in the face. And he still like has, like, you can see his bone there is dented. And, you know, he tried to bring a case against them, against the Israeli military. And they made his life and his family's live in hell. And he was constantly on the run. And eventually he went in and went for questioning. And shortly after that, his own solicitor got arrested. So, you know, there's no justice. Like the military court system there, like, has a 99% conviction rate. It's unheard of, really. Then we had another journalist that spoke to us, and he was documenting like these Palestinians who were who were kind of protesting against these settlers, Israeli settlers that are totally entitled, like, well, they feel totally entitled to basically come onto Palestinian land, kick them out of their houses, and say, hey, well, it's mine now. So he was kind of photographing the Palestinians who were just protesting against it. So they were doing it every Friday. And they shot him as well. They shot him with this bullet. I think it's called a 2-2 or something. And it's like a bullet that moves in your body, keeps moving in your body to cause the most destruction. So he was shot in the skull. And for some reason, that bullet didn't move, and it's still lodged in his skull because the surgeons in Palestine just said it's safer to leave it in there than not. But he was specifically targeted because they're a journalist and a photographer.
Lovely.
Yeah.
So when you're there, like, obviously they have a purpose, which is to share their stories with you and hope that you'll go on your merry way and spread the word.
Yeah.
Did you get an opportunity yourself to, you know, do your own bit of, or was that even possible, to have your own chats with, I'm not even going to say regular people around the place, but, you know, away from the things that people show you? Did you get to experience it all? And how would you describe that?
How to describe life there?
Yeah, and what you witness with ordinary folk there and stuff, you know?
Yeah, so, yeah, I suppose, like, I'm just thinking out of the place, like, where I used to go to the shop to get whatever water thing, you know, like, the young guy. I remember chatting to him one day and just asking him, you know, about like, well, what did his friends work at or whatever. And he said a lot of them work in hotels and stuff. And then he said that his brother worked inside, which is basically in Israel. And sometimes he would go legally and sometimes he would go illegally. And they're kind of going out through, sometimes they have tunnels and an underground network, or they may have like a hole in the wall or whatever that they go through. So he's one person I can think of. Then another guy, Maras, who was basically like sniped in his home at the age of 13, shot multiple times. And I remember him saying to me towards the end of the trip, like, he was like, I feel like my story isn't worth telling. I wasn't doing an operation. And you're just kind of like, oh God, you've been shot. And there's such a level of trauma there, like, and it's not even post-traumatic stress disorder, like, it's chronic because it's ongoing.
So from what you witnessed, for everyone
there has either someone in jail, someone's been murdered. Everyone has a story. And you even, like, at the very beginning when you're talking to people, you're just like, oh God, because I remember, because simultaneously to what was going on with us, with the 10 internationals, there was 250 children on their summer camp. And we were kind of drafted in as extra bodies. Now, obviously, those kids spoke really good English, some of them. But I remember, like, being with a few of them on my own one day, and they were asking me, like, oh, are you married? Where are you from? And, like, the next question was, are your parents alive? Are your brothers and sisters alive? And I just thought, like, that's not a question that I'm thinking of my own nieces and nephews. They would never ask that question. Going in, you were kind of told, okay, go with these bunch of kids. So went, they were all speaking Arabic. So you're kind of trying to pick up from what they're doing. But what it was basically was like a play. Because when I walked into the room, they all had these plastic guns, but they were basically acting out how they would react when one of them died. So basically the scenario was a group of boys went off, they fought the Israelis. They won the first battle, then they lost the second one, and they lost one. So they have this martyr. And then they bring back the martyr, and there's a whole procession around that. And then the girls fall to the ground, and they were weeping and singing these songs. And then, I just thought, this is a scenario that they're playing out, but it's not really a play. Like, they will probably, when they become adults or even teenagers, and they've probably seen it already as children. And definitely, like what they're teaching on this summer camp is about their history. And also, like, they talked about a different teaching program that they ran, basically like what to do when you're arrested. Like, Israeli soldiers are going to leave you down all these documents in front of Hebrew, and they're going to tell you, oh, sign this. And obviously that's not their language. And, it's like how to deal with those situations, because they have all these tactics, because the guys that were in jail told us, they might have you in a room and you can see your friend in the distance, smoking cigarettes, drinking Coke, getting all the niceties. And you're being told, oh, your friend has confessed. They've told us everything. What are you going to tell us now? Even though that friend might not have said anything, but they're all strategies to make you confess. And sometimes they want you to confess to stuff that you haven't even done. So there's like 5,000 prisoners, and I was at this talk last night, and a lady spoke from Badil Centre, who we had actually met when we were there, but she was video called in, and she said that 5,000 people have been arrested since October 7th. So that brings the total to 10.
And yeah. Your journey home and, finally processing everything that you witnessed and that you felt and experienced. What were your main thoughts about what you had been through?
Definitely really eye-opening experience. And I suppose I had written daily emails, so that informed people as I was going through the 2 weeks while I was there. And I suppose it's very hard to comprehend until you actually see it and witness it, of how difficult their lives are, and totally unnecessarily, like, and it's just, I don't know, I came back and I remember going to a concert up in St. Luke's and just thought, like, God, I was like, I'm so lucky, to have the freedom to be here. And it's just like their freedom is restricted and they're so oppressed.
What gig did you go to?
It was Cormac Begley. Yeah, okay. So traditional music.
Fair enough. So when you heard what happened on October 7th, what was your reaction? What were your first thoughts, and what did you think was going to happen next?
I suppose you're kind of like, I was kind of actually flabbergasted that it had happened, that they managed to get out beyond the border, because I just know how heavily monitored that is, and there would be sensors, and I even you'd see all this kind of AI military operation stuff. So I was kind of flabbergasted, and then I knew, I was like, oh my God, I was like, they're going to be made pay for this, and they're literally going to, their objective, I would say, I thought was, they're going to flatten it to the ground. And it's, what is it now, 3.5 weeks later, and they're certainly doing that.
And your community in Laje and the people that you met, like their reaction to the 7th and the actions of Hamas, have Have you exchanged any correspondence with them? You mentioned video
yeah,
calls. What are they saying?
yeah. So they're definitely surprised, I suppose, that it came about. They didn't see it coming. Like, as in they didn't, they didn't think it was happening. But I suppose they see this as a form of armed resistance against their oppression. And the story often is like, oh, October 7th, but we need to remember like that this has been going on for so many years. And they've tried loads of different methods, that aren't armed resistance. And definitely what they would be encouraging us all to do is to participate in the BDS movement, which is basically boycotting Israeli goods. So, getting to know what they are. And that's kind of like a methodology that we can use here.
October the 7th was so difficult, wasn't it? Because it was such a barbaric act. And then, of course, immediately you're having to think about the oppression of Palestinians. And if you or anyone was under that sort of repression for such a long time, something's going to burst. And, of course, it burst in the most horrible, disgusting way.
Yeah.
And now we're witnessing that colossal, horrible response. Yeah, we were chatting earlier about that Irish Times podcast, Fintan O'Toole talking to Hugh Linehan, and the logic about what's appropriate as a response. Is it, do you kill the same amount of people, or do you kill twice as many, or 3 times as many, or 4 times as many, or 5 times as many? Where does that all end? What do you think is going to happen? And do you see, with your understanding of it, can you see any solution at all? Ever?
Well, I suppose in some ways the solution is simple. You stop oppressing people. Give the people their freedom. You can't think that people will constantly live under oppression. And certainly from the people that I met, they're quite passionate about it. So they're not backing down anytime soon. And what was the other part of that question, Greg? Sorry.
Yeah, the solution to it. And of course, now there's deep wounds and a huge appetite for revenge, and I'm never going to forgive you. Like, I think about Ukraine and I think about Russia, and I think for many people that's such an easy thing to process. Russia bad, Ukraine good, Putin is bad, the murderous acts on the Ukrainian people, like, they're never going to make peace with Russia because those wounds are so deep. It's unbelievable. And in this scenario, it's so difficult for us to process because stories go back and the oppression of the Jews, and it goes on and goes on. It's really, really complicated. And then maybe it's just really, really simple. But now with revenge driving everything, you think any chance of any sort of a solution beforehand? God Almighty, that's it's
it is
unthinkable now. It's unthinkable.
Yeah, and I suppose you have to think about as well. Israel is a very, it has the backing of the US, and it gets so much financial aid from them. The amount that it receives is quite significant. And then you have the Palestinians who don't have an army, they don't have an air force, they don't have anything. So it's not even it's the odds are stacked against them.
Was October the 7th inevitable? Some sort of an attack?
Yeah, because obviously everything is going to reach a boiling point when you force people to live like that. There's a tipping point, and people, they're going to resist because they're being dehumanized, the way they're referred to as animals. And, it's kind of like simple tactics just to not see them as people.
And the people you met, was there any happiness there? I saw some of your photographs and I read some of your emails about some of the nice food you had. Like, even under those conditions, I'm thinking of people, the famous writings that you would have had from the concentration camps, and even in the bleakest times, people can find moments of happiness. Did you experience any of that?
Oh, definitely, definitely. Like, we were still going to nice restaurants in Bethlehem, and we were going to the pub like in the evening time. And, you can still have conversations that aren't about the occupation, but of course, it's still the backdrop because like I remember one guy even told us, he brought a group of children from Ida to circus school in Barcelona and brought them to the beach for the first time, and they'd been in the sea and, loved the waves and had gone surfing, and, they had such a great time. But the girl that went with them, she was like, "Oh, I never want to leave the West Bank again," because it was so difficult to bring them out because they had to go out through Jordan. So they had to pass the Palestinian border, the Israeli border, and the Jordan border. And it's just kind of like, again, time snatched away from them because they're literally just waiting, being they just have to go through all these extra hoops. But definitely, like, they brought us to beautiful places and we watched, gorgeous sunsets, had amazing food, so kind, giving us so much. Like your plate was always, overloaded, and you got smart early on. You knew just to take a little bit the first time because you were going to be made go back. We were the bit of volunteering that we did was to paint the wall of leading into the camp, and like these delivery trucks, like who are delivering stuff to the shop. We don't know them. Nah, we certainly don't know them. But even the people in Ida, they don't know them either. And they're coming with ice creams and water, and there's constantly tea being poured. And if I probably smoked, there's cigarettes to be smoked. And, like people were so kind and welcoming and, so glad that we had come. So glad that we'd come to Palestine to see it, and delighted that they had international visitors.
They must have thought you were nuts, did they?
They probably didn't. I feel like people at home thought I was nuts.
like your mum and your dad.
Yeah, or just like, to be honest, there were some people I just, like, as in I kind of kept it on the down low that I was going, because I was just like, I can't be dealing with just because you have a problem with it, I'm going to go anyway. So
what's your message to anyone listening, and anyone like myself? I won't say a casual observer, but you're looking confused at the news and you're trying to say this is terrible and that's terrible and there's right on both sides and goes on. What would you say to anyone from your experience?
I think our Western media is contaminated for sure. And to make sure that you're also tuning in to something like Al Jazeera, or to follow some journalist that's in Gaza. There's one guy at the moment, Mataz, I can't think of his last name, but like I remember when I started following him first on October 7th, he only had a couple of 100,000 followers, and now he's like 8 million. So go follow, like Eye on Palestine, some of those Instagram accounts, because that way, you're seeing these journalists and what's happening. And I think there's a few books that people can read and just to educate yourself, because even though the media makes it seem like it's such a complex situation, and it is complex. It's definitely not an easy solution. But if you read about it and learn about it and know that it just didn't begin on October 7th, it makes, I suppose it helps people understand how that came about. Like, it wasn't just a random incident without context. It has context, and to educate yourself on what is that context.
I think dig deep so that you can get the truth, because again, I think this is one of the most distressing things about where we are right now. There's so much false information hopping around the place. It's so difficult, and expressing an opinion, you're going to get people down your neck immediately. So as well as not being sure, as well as not knowing what you can believe and what you can't believe, as well as knowing that the media that you're digesting can be quite orientated one way or the other, depending on...
And it's really simple things that they do. It's the choice of language that they use. And once you start analysing who died and who was killed, or like, language is really powerful and can just, you mightn't even, it's very subtle, like you mightn't even realize it.
I'm glad you're back in one piece.
Yeah.
You're on the Win Happy podcast, and I know a lot of our subject matter wasn't very win happy, but in a way, that's life as well, and we need to live a happy life. I think we owe to everyone to understand and know things. What's happiness to you?
What is it? I suppose for me, it's kind of like maybe a mixture of different things, because I have a lot of interests. So I think it's being able to do a lot of those different things so that I'm not just focused on one thing, that I'm able to do all the creative habits that I have.
I think you, you like doing lots of things, definitely, Shelley.
Yeah, a lot of random things, but hopefully it'll all piece together.
And I talk to people then about winning happy, and for me, and the example I give is that you might like playing football, but it would be a little bit pointless if there were no goalposts. And when you put the ball in the back of the net, there's an amazing feeling, yes, of achievement. So what's winning for you, maybe now and going forward? What does winning look like?
I suppose for me now, it's kind of like carving out my own path, because my path is kind of unknown even to myself. So I suppose it's kind of, the journey of going on that, because I'm not even sure what the destination route is just yet. But I think hopefully by going through the process, something will happen at the end.
It'll bring you somewhere.
Yeah, hopefully.
My very last question for you is, what was your best day ever?
Oh, jeez. I don't know. I suppose actually maybe like, I kind of am just thinking back actually to when me and my friend, and we were the two that went to New York ourselves. I think, that adventure of setting off then was kind of very exciting. And my friend Kate, she was I suppose she kind of thought we were going to be going to live in this brownstone. And I was definitely the more realistic, being like, we definitely aren't living there. But I suppose that was a real adventure. And it was exciting because we didn't know what was ahead, really. So.
And while you were there, did you have a best day?
Oh, I don't know. I suppose that what I really liked about being there was that you could just kind of stumble upon anything and everything. You actually just didn't know what was going to, you might come across this cool food truck or cool musician on the side in the subway, or you just didn't know. Like, everything was so unexpected. And actually, maybe that's what I kind of enjoy, is more, I don't know what's coming, even though that's maybe not great sometimes.
Yeah, it looks like you thrive on uncertainty, Shelley.
Yeah, but sometimes I'm like, oh, flip.
Shelley, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story, and best of luck with the business. For anyone that's listening who wants a delicious, delicious treat,
Shelly's,
SHELLYS.ie.
Yeah.
And and following day delivery, thereabouts, you reckon?
Well, yeah, it depends. It's better if you order at the start of the week, just because Mr. Postman is better at the start of the week. I'm always afraid of sending stuff on a Thursday, just in case. So Tuesday.
Listen, thank you so much. Take it easy.
Thanks, Greg.
Bye, Shelley.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.